Hi friends! Welcome back to the Project Return Online Classroom. I'm Miss Celia, and today we're going to be combining a little poetry and history lesson. We're going to be talking about the very famous poet. His name is Homer. Homer was an influential Greek poet, and he was famous for writing two epic poems. And if you remember from our previous poetry videos, an epic poem is a detailed, long poem that is usually describing a story or some type of narrative. In this case, Homer's poems were hundreds of pages long. His two poems that he's most famous for are entitled Iliad and Odyssey. His work incorporated Greek religion and mythology and Greek polytheism. And Greek polytheism refers to the Greek religion that believed in multiple gods at the time. They believed that each god had a different purpose and different function. And he also incorporated Greek creatures and mythology into his work as well. And not much is known about the life of Homer because he existed so long ago. However, his works were finally translated into English in about the 16th century, so thousands of years later. And his work is still studied today in school. I remember when I was in high school, I studied the Odyssey, and it ended up becoming one of my favorite works that I ever learned about. Greek religion was super important at this time. Religion was everything that they believed in, and so Greek mythology became a hallmark in Homer's works. Greek gods are essentially like a family tree. They're all related to each other, but all serve specific purposes and all have different abilities as to what they rule over. Kronos is considered the father of the Olympians, and the Olympians are the Greek gods that we more commonly hear about in works based on Greek mythology. And he had many children. The three major ones that we have more than likely heard about are Zeus. Zeus is the god of thunder, and he is also considered king of the Olympians. His wife Hera was considered the goddess of children. Kronos also gave birth to Poseidon, who is the god of the sea, and Hades, who's the god of the underworld. So those are the three major players in the Olympians, and then there are also some other really important gods that they worshipped at this time as well, including Athena, the goddess of war, Ares, the god of war, Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, Apollo, the god of music and art, and Hermes, who was considered the messenger god. So Homer's work incorporated these gods and monsters into it, and it makes sense that his work was centered around Greek mythology because he was Greek, right? Lore in Greek mythology also proposes that there are monsters that live on the earth with humans. Some of these monsters include the centaurs, which are half man and half horse, the cyclops, which are giants that walk among humans, and they are said to be incredibly strong, but they are separated because they only have one eye right in the center of their forehead rather than having two eyes. The Hydra, which is a giant reptilian creature with many heads, and it's said that if you cut off one head of the Hydra, two more will grow back in its place. This is a very strong creature, very difficult to defeat. Charybdis. Charybdis is interesting because it's never officially been described in a physical form, but what we do know about Charybdis is that it's an underwater monster that is capable of swallowing massive amounts of water, and it creates whirlpools that can destroy entire fleets of ships. So it's said to be a massive underwater sea creature. And the Minotaur. The Minotaur is a gruesome creature. He's got the body of a man and the head of a bull. And the Minotaur is so violent and considered to be so gruesome that he had to be hidden away in a very difficult maze so he couldn't get out. And this maze is called the Labyrinth. And then finally, we have probably the most famous monster in Greek mythology. We have Medusa. Medusa is said to appear like a beautiful woman, but her hair is actually consisted of hundreds of tiny snakes. And when you look at her, she turns you into stone. So going back to the poems, the first one we're going to go over very briefly is going to be the Iliad. And the Iliad is an epic poem that's set during the Trojan War. So it is a war of the Turks, the Turkish people, versus the city of Troy. And it describes the battle between King Agamemnon, who ruled over Troy, and Achilles. And Achilles is a Greek demigod warrior. And it also details the story of the Trojan horse. Now, if we're not familiar with the Trojan horse is a kind of a lesson to be learned in history. The Turkish invaded the city of Troy by tricking them with a peace offering. So the Turkish dropped off this largely constructed wooden horse statue that the citizens of Troy considered to be a peace offering. So they took it into their walls, behind their walls, and took it into their city. And then when night fell, it turns out that the Trojan horse was actually hollowed out and full of Turkish soldiers. And so when night fell, the soldiers exited the horse and then would then proceed to invade the city of Troy, and therefore defeating the city of Troy. The Iliad is actually considered a sequel to the Odyssey, and the Odyssey is the works that I read, so I'm much more familiar with it, and I think it is a lot more adventurous of a work than the Iliad is, but both are definitely super important and super influential when it comes to Greek history and Greek mythology. The Odyssey, as I mentioned, was not translated into English until about the 16th century, but the poem is said to be as old as 566 BCE, so thousands and thousands of years old. It details the time after the Trojan War. So the Odyssey was written first, and then the Iliad came after it, but it details what happened before what happened in the Odyssey. The main character's name is Odysseus, and he is considered the king of Ithaca, and he went on a voyage that took him years and years to return home from. His protector was Athena, the goddess of war. She had a soft spot for him, so she watched over him his entire journey. But during this time, Poseidon, the god of the sea, was upset with Odysseus, and so he gave him a lot of obstacles and challenges that Odysseus had to face while on his journey that caused it to take much longer than expected. Athena, after years and years of Odysseus' journey, Athena convinced Zeus, the king of the gods, to allow Odysseus to return home to Ithaca, but she went around Poseidon's back and did it without letting him know, so that did not make Poseidon too happy. The Odyssey essentially details Odysseus' ventures on his voyage. During this time, he faced a lot of different storms and monsters and different things that halted his journey. For example, he was chased by storms all around the sea that were caused by Poseidon. He faced monsters that we mentioned earlier, like Charybdis, which was that giant sea monster, and the Cyclopses. And he also faced a mythical enchantress called Cersei. And Cersei is considered to be one of the most beautiful creatures to ever exist, but she also puts a spell over her suitors that makes them stay with her longer. She tempts them with affection and fruit and wine and things that make them want to stay, all the while they are under a spell and cannot leave because they don't realize they are actually under the spell. She also turned half of Odysseus' crew into swine, and he remained on her island for a whole year under her spell until Athena finally was able to speak to him and tell him that he needs to leave. And then at the end of the Odyssey, Odysseus returns home from Ithaca thanks to the help of Athena, and she provides him with treasure in excess to share with the people of Ithaca. Odysseus' works seem like fairy tales and seem like stories, but you have to remember that at the time they were written, Greek mythology was the central belief of society at the time. So these stories are very real and very detailed, as this is what they truly believed in. And that tells us a lot about the history of religion and how today's religions came to be, and also how people perceived the world at that time. And it also has a huge influence on modern day poetry. These are some of the original epic poems. And so because they were so long and so detailed, they really set the bar pretty high as to what an epic poem is and what it needs to consist of. Thank you guys so much for joining me today on the Project Return online classroom. I hope you enjoyed our little history and poetry slam video. I find history to be super interesting, so if you guys are interested in seeing some more history videos, go ahead, drop me a comment, or just let me know that you enjoyed this video and would like to see some more. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and I will speak to you in the next video. Bye guys.